Yesterday in stage 19 of the Giro d'Italia, I completed the triple of a stage win in each of the 3 Grand Tours. My first one was in the Vuelta España in 2019, Tour de France, stage 15, Vuelta España again in 2023, and now Giro d'Italia, stage 19. Enjoy watching the stages.
With the terrain so tough, it was inevitable that the break of the day would be full of strong climbers. Marc Soler of Team Movistar was amongst them, and it was he who took maximum points on the first climb of the day, ahead of Theo Geoghegan-Hart of Team Ineos. Behind them, it was Tony Martin of Jumbo-Visma who was taking responsibility for the bulk of the chasing, but with the best placed rider in the break over 10 minutes down and Sepp Kuss up front, they could afford to be reasonably relaxed. It was Samitier who took the maximum 10 points at the top, ahead of Navarro and O'Connor, who took 6 and 4 respectively. Angel Madrazo still holding on to the lead in that competition, but only by the skin of his teeth. You couldn't hold this man back though. Samitier was soon on the attack again, riding towards the final climb with 22 seconds advantage over everybody else. Cue the robot himself, Kirienka, who set off in pursuit of the Spaniard with 6Ks to the start of the climb, nobody wanting or able to go with him. 2.5 Ks later and he'd caught Samitier, sprinting straight past him, although unable to distance him, at least for the time being. Group of favourites hit that final climb with some incredible speed, Astana determined to do what they could to put Roglic under pressure. Although he still had a man up front in the form of Sepp Kuss. At this point he was being given his own freedom to ride his own race, and he was doing very well. He sailed straight past Samitier into the lead. Wasn't long before we had our first attack behind, world champion Valverde the man to do it, but Roglic was very quick to react. And in fact, he was the only man able to. The riders who sit in first and second on GC were proving today once again that they are the strongest in this race. Their advantage over the rest grew to over 15 seconds, Jakob Fuglsang here doing his best to limit the damage for his teammate Lopez, Pogacar closely watching his closest rival in the best young riders classification. Quintana was far from his best again today though, here he is leading the third group of favourites on the road. Kuss was a man on a mission though. It's not often he gets the freedom to ride for himself, and he didn't need a second invitation to take it. His lead by this point over 30 seconds over this duo of Guerrero and Geoghegan-Hart. Soler had dropped back to pace his teammate Valverde as well, giving both he and Roglic a bit of respite, their gap over more than 30 seconds over the Lopez-Pogacar group. What a race it's been for this man though. The American Sepp Kuss has ridden his heart out for Roglic each and every day, but today it was time for his own success. Playing it up to the crowds, and why not? Guerrero would be the best of the rest, out-sprinting Geoghegan-Hart for second. There was no let-up behind either though. Roglic and Valverde sprinting towards the line, keen to maximise their gains over the others, and those gains would be quite significant. It would be 40 seconds before Lopez and Pogacar came across the line, also still locked together. That is the 5th victory of this young man's career, and the first in fact outside of American soil.
On the long valley road up into Andorra, things calmed down until Ineos and Movistar began riding in the GC group. A gap of 10 minutes soon started to reduce. Up ahead, it looked as though the break would take the stage, and Michael Woods was kicking things off, but the 2 Ineos Grenadiers members of the break were pulled back to help in the GC battle. Nairo Quintana was trying to win Arkea Samsic's first ever Tour de France stage, and in turn battled back the King of the Mountains jersey. And much of this stage would be about descent, and with Jersey Open flapping in the wind after having moved up to second on GC, Martin was losing time the day after. Sepp Kuss attacked with just under 20 kilometres to go. One of 3 riders in the breakaway from Jumbo-Visma went over the final climb of the day. 20-odd seconds his advantage over Valverde. Behind Uran, Carapaz, Vingegaard and the rest would have a try at trying to distance Tadej Pogacar. As Kuss on home roads as a resident of the Principality of Andorra would make sure that Valverde would not come back to him. Wout van Aert had dropped back to the yellow jersey group and was doing his best to try and put Pogacar under pressure in favour of Vingegaard. And Ben O'Connor was also moving up in the GC. The day's stage honours, however, went to Sepp Kuss. Already a winner at the Vuelta, now a stage winner at the Tour de France. 2 mountain stage wins for Jumbo-Visma in a tour where they'd lost their leader. Not a bad return in the end for the Dutch team. Alejandro Valverde rolled back the years to finish second. And Kuss, a new American winner at the Tour de France.
Jumbo-Visma themselves had planted Sepp Kuss, Jan Tratnik, Attila Valter, Dylan van Baal up front. Intermediate sprint points came, and bonus seconds went to Soler. Not that that would matter by the end of the day. The margins were going to be much bigger. The big climb was duly arriving, and when it did, both the peloton that was chasing, and now smaller than the breakaway itself, would start to fracture. And Sepp Kuss, well, he set off for glory. Just a cherry on the cake, you might say, on a day that was bound to be good for Jumbo-Visma. 4 up front, Roglic giving chase from the pack. He was joined by Jonas Vingegaard. They pushed on, putting the hurt on Remco Evenepoel. Evenepoel at this point just could not manage to drive into the gap. Sepp Kuss was gunning for the stage win, but would it be enough for the leader's jersey? Lenny Martinez was riding with Bardet. Some friction between the pair of them was reported by the time they crossed the line, but emotions, they rise up very quickly in situations such as this. Martinez pushed on, trying to sprint home and grab the leader's jersey, attempting to become the youngest rider since 1904 to wear a Grand Tour leader's jersey. Sepp Kuss came around the hoarded section, took some high fives, shed a few seconds there, got himself 10 bonus seconds as well, but was not to lead the race by the end of the day. That would be the youngster, Lenny Martinez, superstar of cycling already at the age of 20. Brilliant. Bardet in third place, and then we were starting to look for the gaps. Roglic came to the line, aided on occasion by Vingegaard, and then the clock ticked back. Where on earth was Evenepoel? In the end, he was to preserve a lead over Roglic and Vingegaard overall and hold on to 9th place in the general classification. Sepp Kuss taking a fine win. Jumbo-Visma taking a big stride towards glory in this race. But Lenny Martinez taking control of the lead. Big emotions on a big climb. Sepp Kuss couldn't look happier when he crossed the line.
First big test en route was the Passo Duran, and that was where the break finally began to take shape. Giulio Ciccone, Eina Rubio and Giulio Pellizzari among the many on the offensive, and an intriguing group assembling further down the mountain. A gaggle of riders from Tudor, headed up by Michael Storer, also Derek G. West adding an early GC dynamic to proceedings. Climbing well was Alberto Bettiol, while Visma Lease bike settled into a rhythm with what we can tentatively call the peloton. Ben O'Connor drifting back to this group, having not been able to stick with the leaders for the time being. Ciccone was in the box seat to start reducing the deficit to Jonas Vingegaard in the King of the Mountains classification, starting the day well, taking 40 points over the Passo Duran. The Storer G West group made connection with the head of the race on the next pass before Ciccone and Rubio took off for a little while. They contested the second and third summits of the day, with 36 points eventually going into the pocket of the Italian. The Tifosi, faithfully passionate even above 2,000 metres above sea level, witnessed Ciccone taking the biggest chunk of points on offer today. 50 points at the top of the Passo Giao, and also the prize of the Cima Coffee as the leading rider at the highest point of the race. A butterfly effect of incidents then occurred in the space of 4 kilometres. Halfway up the Pass of Falzarega was the Red Bull kilometre. Derek G. West and Michael Storer were challenging for podium spots on GC with the time they'd made so far, and they were challenging for bonus seconds. Eina Rubio was rather put out, to say the least, because he wanted more points in the Red Bull kilometre sub-classification. He then duly got his revenge on Little Trek by out-sprinting Ciccone at the summit of the Falzarego. It obviously didn't sit well with the new leader of the King of the Mountains, and then what followed can only be described as a rage attack. Giulio Ciccone attacking over the top and throwing himself down the 20-kilometre descent, and eventually pulling out a lead of 1 minute and 9 seconds by the time he got to the bottom on the chasing group, which still include the likes of Caruso, Hurt and Sepp Kuss. because his teammate Jonas Vingegaard was sitting nicely in Group 3 still, and net company Ineos were getting to work to wind back the advantage that Stora and G West were gaining over Taman Arensman, who started the day on the general classification podium. A beautifully poised situation then as the final climb began, not long, but long enough when it averages over 9.5%. Cicconi's lead began to tumble when Palazzari and Kuss attacked from the chasing group, West riding his own rhythm and leaving Michael Stora and the rest behind. Ahead, Cicconi was still twitchy, still irritable, and he'd eventually have something else to be annoyed about, because Kuss was firmly in the zone, fully focused on the Italian's wheel, and not messing around as soon as he got there, wasting no time in kicking on ahead of him, with a devastating late attack that would eventually leave Cicconi heartbroken. Things were developing quickly behind too. Palazzari not ultimately able to stick with Kuss, but quickly getting back to work further down the mountain. He brought Hindley back into the Vingegaard and Gall group before his day was done under the Flamme Rouge. With Arensman at close to 40 seconds now, Hindley was set to rise to third on GC, ahead of the Dutchman. The stage though belonged to Sepp Kuss, almost a sleeping giant in the breakaway, not needed for satellite rider duties in the end, and reminding us all of his class into Piani di Bazzi. It was not to be for Ciccone, but second place on the day, a few more King of the Mountains points. Felix Gall in third with 4 bonus seconds, ahead of Vingegaard and Hindley. Time ticked on for Taman Arensman though. He would end up 12th on the day and ceding a minute and 2 to Jai Hindley. Sepp Kuss is not a prolific winner, but when he does, it's usually in the most testing of mountain conditions. He's now got the Grand Tour trilogy of stage wins in his palmares.